Welcome and good morning to everyone. This is Mike Lampa, Principal Advisor at Great Data Minds. Thank you for joining us for today's topic, which we're quite excited to be chatting about, the people analytics. I want to welcome my guest today, Michael Chen, Senior Manager of People Analytics at Post Holdings. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you, Mike. Excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited too. I'm really looking forward to this topic. But before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items. We definitely encourage collaboration and networking between the attendees. So please feel free to post your thoughts and observations or questions of Michael in the chat window, and we'll keep an eye on those questions and make sure we discuss them before the session is over. We are recording today, so be forewarned on what you do say. Just kidding. Our next wave of modern data platform and modern data analytics workshops is scheduled for January. If you're interested in joining us for those workshops, please let us know in the chat window, and we'll send over a complimentary code for you to use to join us at the workshop. All righty. And with that, let's get the show started. Alexa, before I start having my dialogue with Michael, I think we have a poll, don't we?
We sure do, Mike. Here we go.
All right. All right, folks. So on a scale of 1 to 5, how effective and efficient do you feel your HR analytics or people analytics program is today? 1 being not effective and 5 being your people analytics rocks the house.
Which would be awesome. I hope to see a lot of fun.
No 5 so far. Hopefully we can help you with that.
All right. We have a few folks joining just in time to participate in the poll. We'll give it just another second or two, and then we'll get started.
All right.
Thank you, Alexa. Let's see here. Oh, well, a lot of people are in the middle of the road. Just started to implement the analytics program. So awesome. Great, great, great. Thank you, everyone. All right. So Michael, what trends are you seeing in the people analytics space? I noticed you like to use people analytics at Post Holdings as opposed to HR, which I like. That's kind of nice. Humanizing it a little bit. So anyway, but what kind of trends are you seeing as it pertains to the people analytics space?
Yeah, most certainly. So a lot of trends nowadays in people analytics bring a lot of more psychology, a lot of behavioral economics into the people analytics area or into human resources overall. They're really looking at how do we best have our workforce perform at its best, right? So by bringing in things like IO psychologists, nowadays you'll see a lot of people with PhDs in IO psych on people analytics teams as part of a COE. I've seen a lot of more like behavioral economics people, I guess, on people analytics teams as well. Really understanding how can we, best, like I said, have our workforce perform at its best, right? But also, you see a lot of kind of the typical machine learning, a lot of the artificial intelligence, statistics, things of that nature as well in people analytics. So it's really evolved from, I would say historically, it probably started around workforce planning, staffing, right? That's how we got things like the DuPont schedule into place, pulling stuff from operations, and then moving on to things where you bring in like A/B testing and things of that nature, which is more of a marketing concept or idea. And then now kind of combining it all into one which has led to people analytics. So those are kind of some of the trends I'm seeing right now.
Wow. Well, so it's interesting, the psychological and behavioral economics coming into play. So more the true science approach to it. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. So, a lot of organizations are now, if they haven't already, they're starting to realize that, people, we need to be nurtured, right? The workforce, it's not just, hey, I hired you for a job, you're a butt in a seat, now go do it. There's a lot of science and a lot of research going into place that talk about how can we nurture the workforce so that it's performing at its best. Obviously, if you take a look at any company's GL, salaries make up probably arguably the largest cost to an organization. So how do we get the best ROI on our investments in our workforce? So that's where psychology and kind of behavioral economics come into place, where you're able to say, okay, we made this, for sake of argument here, this $50,000 investment in a year into this individual, right? So how can we help them grow? How can we help them develop? And how can we nurture them so that they stay with us and they're able to perform, at a peak?
Interesting. Very interesting. And does it help with forming or crafting job roles and responsibilities, job descriptions? Do we use the analytics to see where there might be a need for tweaking job descriptions, or what kind of stimuli might bring that about?
Yeah, so that's where a lot of the machine learning aspect comes in now. So there are companies out there or tools out there that will actually, you put in your job description and it will actually read through it and then tell you, is this job description more masculine or more feminine, right? So they're trying to strip out any sort of bias or underlying bias and how they're attracting candidates now. And so there are really cool tools out there where they'll tell you, there are certain words that get written or get used that kind of are more, more drawn to men versus women or vice versa. So how do we get, in order to get a more equitable and diverse workforce, there are organizations, there are tools that use these tools to say, when we're posting a job, we want to post the most gender neutral description out there so that we're able to attract a wide variety of candidates and be able to have, a very diverse workforce from that.
So that's interesting, helping us ferret out any kind of unintended bias, especially as we're just trying to get to this much more social equity. I like that. Very cool.
Absolutely. And it's just, to your point, it is like, it's unconscious bias, right? The way that we talk, the way that we communicate with individuals, it's all through the way that, we are, our backgrounds, the way we grew up, how, the environments that we are in and such. And so a lot of organizations are trying to move towards being able to post jobs that, strip out, those words that might be kind of more masculine or more feminine and, or any of the variety of such. And so, analytics really comes into play where you're able to objectively kind of just take a look at the data or the words on a job description and be able to say, we ran it through, this tool, and through machine learning, these are the words that are more feminine or masculine. Let's try to find more gender neutral words to replace them so we can attract, more diverse candidates.
Very cool. Cool. So feels like there's a good number of KPIs that we can use around as a leader to grow and mature my organization in a desired direction. What are some of the most valuable key performance indicators that a leader would need from your perspective?
Sure, absolutely. Number one, that this is a request I get asked all the time, is turnover. What are, our attrition rates by gender, by race and ethnicity, at a particular plant location, overall, anything of that nature. I get asked turnover, so I can't even tell you how many times I get asked turnover, to be honest with you. And that's the number one kind of metric that I've seen a lot of leaders and a lot of organizations focus on. Because when we take a look at turnover, essentially it's, people leaving the organization. So they're leaving for one reason or another. And so a lot of organizations, they're wanting to figure out, why are people leaving and how can we help them stay or make them stay at an organization? Because when you hire somebody and you put in the effort to recruit, there's a lot of cost that goes into that. And then when you have an employee at an organization and you're developing them and you're training them, there's also a lot of costs that go into that as well. And arguably, the last thing you want to be able to see is, talent that you've invested in walk out the door and go to, your competitors, right? So by looking at turnover and figuring out why folks are leaving your organization, then companies are able to put in the necessary programs in place to perhaps, potentially reduce that turnover, which then reduces your turnover cost as well. So I would say the number one KPI that I get asked all the time is turnover, and people want to look at it in many different ways, and they just want to slice and dice the data and, turn it upside down and whatnot. The one thing that I will say is, attrition is natural. In an organization that has 0% attrition, I would kind of be very skeptical at it, right? So while attrition is very important, there are times where it just is what it is. People just leave for things that we can't help, that we can't change for one way or another. And so that comes into, when we look at attrition, there are things like flight risk models that I've, worked on, where we try to predict what, the likelihood of somebody leaving an organization. And we take a look at all sorts of different types of, attributes of that, whether it's somebody's, the typical demographic stuff, their age, their gender, ethnicity, things of that nature. And we take a look at things like their salary, how many times they've gone a promotion, stuff like that. And that can produce a pretty good model for attrition. But ultimately, at the end of the day, there are things that, cause somebody to leave, such as, we can't measure somebody's loyalty to an organization, right? We can't measure whether or not there's going to be an unexpected family or personal event that comes up that requires them to leave an organization and things of that nature. But by being able to take a look at turnover and be able to take a look at with what data that we do have, we're able to really kind of help organizations, or at least my organization, really tackle turnover and be able to change things that we can change. So I would say turnover is probably the number one metric. And as moving forward, there are other KPIs as well. So, we see a lot of organizations now getting into engagement surveys. So taking a look at that ESAT, or employee satisfaction score as well. How engaged and how satisfied are our employees with the workplace, right? So we want to be able to ensure that employees are, actively engaged. We want to make sure that they have a good experience. We want to make sure that they're satisfied with, the culture, the environment, the workplace that they're in, so that, they want to stay at an organization. So I do see a lot of organizations now doing engagement surveys, measuring those ESAT scores, and being able to show their employees that we're asking you these questions on these surveys because we care. We want to know your opinion, so that we want to be able to figure out what areas are we lacking in so that we can improve upon them, right?
A quick question on the ESAT. I'm just curious, because it feels like a derivative of CSAT, customer satisfaction kind of model, which has been giving way to Net Promoter Score. Is anybody doing like a Net Promoter Score from an employee's perspective?
Yeah, so I think the Net Promoter Score in a people or HR perspective is, how likely are you going to promote the workplace to, people that don't work here? How likely are you recommending your, current manager or the company to other people? And I think you bring up such a great point. A lot of concepts, a lot of projects, a lot of themes that develop in people analytics actually come from, the marketing side, right? So at an organization, you take a look at the marketing department and the retention department, they're focused on their customers, which is the external base. And HR, our customers are our employees. So a lot of the concepts, a lot of the surveys, a lot of the things that happen in like marketing or retention can directly be applied in human resources, because all you have to do is switch the word customer for employee, and it's basically the same playing field for that.
Yeah. And back on the turnover, excuse me. Is there any kind of target attrition rates by industry that are published that companies can use as a guide for whether they're trending above or below industry targets?
Yeah, so I would say there's I'm not sure if there's a target turnover percentage by industry, but there's a lot of surveys out there. I know like Towers Watson, Mercer, Radford, they all have there's a lot of surveying companies that have surveys on what kind of average turnover is by organization, by industry, things of that nature. When all else fails, my kind of go-to is the Bureau of Labor Statistics. Number one, it's free. And number two, they break it down to, a good number of different, industries that you can kind of benchmark yourself against nationwide.
Interesting. Cool. Thank you. So sorry to interrupt, so we got attrition and ESAT or ENPS.
Right.
Any other kind of key metrics?
Absolutely. So the next, two that I've seen, they kind of get lumped in together is more around DE&I, so diversity, equity, and inclusion, or D&I for a lot of organizations, just diversity and inclusion, trying to figure out how do we have a, more diverse, more inclusive workforce, right? And so if I recall correctly, there was a short, small, mini scandal where I believe an executive at a large financial institution said that we don't have diversity at our organization because that's just not the pool that people that we can pull from, right? And so so now a lot of organizations are focused on diversity and inclusion because they want to be able to have a more diverse workforce. They want to keep those KPIs. They want to take a look at the ratio of men and women and those who don't choose to disclose that their gender. They want to be able to take a look at those that breaking down by race and ethnicity, but not just at an enterprise level. They want to take a look at it kind of by level, down at the individual contributor level, up to manager, directors, VPs, boards, things of that nature. And so what goes hand in hand with that would be, taking a look at our hiring channels, and also taking a look at the KPIs associated with, where are we getting a majority of our candidates from? Are we pulling candidates from one particular channel, and do they have a certain, particular attribute in terms of D&I in that channel, or are we diversifying our hiring sources and tapping into kind of that unknown talent from other hiring channels as well? So there are, organizations that I've, connected with that have teams or have individuals that are dedicated to just taking a look at people analytics, but focus specifically on talent acquisition and being able to, help the recruiters craft, recruiting plans or TA plans that focus on how do we increase the diversity in our candidates and in our hires.
So with some of these KPIs, what kind of insights are we generating for management and leadership and even the individual contributor around career development or, or even, implication on job descriptions, back to that question earlier, to get people on certain paths based on propensity of performance or whatnot? You feel for the kinds of insights you would deliver to me as a leader.
Absolutely. So that actually, leads to the next KPI that I see organizations focused on is around things like succession planning. Taking a look at how, what percentage of our workforce are currently on succession plans, and then taking a look at the diversity breakdown of those. And then also taking a look at, for folks that were on succession plans, how many of those roles did we fill externally, right? When there was a ready now successor or a ready in 1 to 2 year, successor, and why did we fill it externally? Because if I was on a succession plan and the organization is telling me that you're ready now, when the role opens up, like we're going to slot you right in and you're going to be a great fit for it, and that's what we're developing for. But then the role opens up and it gets chosen to be filled externally. Well, I kind of get left in a defeated mood, right? And that's the perception is you talked me up, you hyped me up, and now the opportunity came and you went another direction. So why did you, put all that effort in? Why did I put all that effort into being developed for this succession plan? So, I think leaders really care about, in terms of development, taking a look at things like succession planning, but also taking a look at things of just kind of more, I would say, routine. How many of our employees are utilizing our LMS system? What kind of trainings are they, watching, or what kind of trainings are they taking? What are people asking for that we don't have a training for yet, and that we should probably develop something for them? The cool thing when it comes to learning and development is that there are tools out there where they take a look. It's like a tracker that they install on your browser, and it basically sees what kind of articles are you reading. Because I know for me, I have LinkedIn open on my computer at work, and every couple hours or so, I'll just go scroll through LinkedIn. I'll see an article from Harvard Business Review that I'll just strikes my interest. I'll read it, right? And so this tool, what it does is that it'll go through and see that I read an HBR article about, let's say, leadership, and so then it goes into the LMS and it actually pulls out leadership, related training that will, that it'll send me and say, hey, recently I saw you read this. We actually have some great training in our LMS that, I think is applicable as well. Mm-hmm. And so I think leaders, when it comes to professional development, care about what are folks asking for, how can we best support them, because they don't want to have training or L&D content out there that aren't being utilized or aren't being used. They want to keep content that's relevant, that's going to be engaging to people, going back to that ESAT score, and that people want to be able to watch and learn from.
That triggers a thought in my head too. It seems that being able to see what people are demonstrating an interest in could possibly even influence what kind of curriculum should be in the learning and development arena. Are you seeing those kinds of trends happening?
Yeah, so I mean, I see a lot of, it's more, a lot of surveying gets done. What kind of training or learning development courses do you want to, be able to have in our LMS? What do you want our L&D department to be able to put out? And it's, as much as it is content, it's also about delivery. So some people really like the in-person sessions. Obviously, that's not happening due to COVID right now, right? Right. Other people, they want to be able to do it on their own time, right? So like, for example, me, I sometimes at night, I'll have Netflix going on in the background, but I'll just have something pulled up on my computer screen that I just kind of read through and that's how I learn and develop and get myself engaged. So as much as it is the content, it's also about kind of the delivery and the format and the medium that the content is being delivered through. And we collect a lot of that through essentially just active surveying of folks, right? Because if we, people don't, the one thing I've realized is folks don't tend to ask for things unless they're being asked of it. So we do actively survey. I prefer actively surveying our population so that we can say, hey, we want to know, and this is your opportunity to let us know what can we do from learning development to help best support you.
So do you send your survey questions through that bias machine learning module to make sure that we don't have an unintended bias in our surveys?
Not yet, but I mean, nowadays, it's funny that you say that because I have seen so many tools out there. If I can think of something, I guarantee you there's a startup that's already working on it. And it's really, really cool to be able to see kind of that cutting edge technology where folks, these startups are doing some really, really cool stuff. So not yet, but hopefully someday we'll get there.
What about, you talked a little bit about the turnover and attrition and whatnot. And you mentioned about, getting the right investment in getting the right return on the investment that you make in your people. What are some of the techniques or sources for really getting a good, unbiased opinion or view of somebody's productivity? I mean, how do I get to this objective measure of return?
Yeah, so productivity is actually a really funky thing to try and measure, right? So there are ways where I've seen people try to measure productivity by how long somebody stays online, right? How long somebody is active on Teams or how many emails somebody sends, and things of that nature. For me, I would say productivity is really about how, what kind of deliverables are, the teams delivering or is an individual delivering, right? And then this goes into a little bit about kind of management styles, but we're not going to get at that. But it's really about, for me, productivity is if the team or the individual is delivering what, they're delivering, then metrics such as how long were they online for during the day become moot, right? Some people work better at night, other people work better early in the mornings, things of that, everyone has a different working style. So for me, when I measure productivity, I really like to be able to see, can we measure what results people are gaining, right? If operations said that they're going to reduce their, runtime, I'm making things up, by 3%, and if they were able to do that, then they were productive, right? If finance is able to, do more, I don't know what, process more invoices or whatnot, right? Like that to me is a measure of productivity, not how long somebody stays online or how long somebody's active on Teams or anything of that sort.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So where's the where does HR or analytics, where's the line where does the HR group or department do the analytics on behalf of the leaders and the managers of the people and then turns it over? Or do you is it a more collaborative model, or do you see all sorts of different approaches around where the people analytics actually happens?
Yeah, so for me, I very much make it very collaborative, because if a certain department comes to my team and says, hey, we want to do an attrition model, for example, right? What we see the data, we see numbers, we see values. We don't know the backstory behind it, right? There could have been a very simple explanation as to why attrition was super low or super high, right? And so by making it a collaborative kind of project, you're able to work and learn the backstory, because there's a story to everything. We see the numbers, and there's always an explanation for that. So I personally like to make it very collaborative, but also not just making it collaborative. I also like to put some of the ownership onto the team or the department asking for this type of analysis, because sometimes we get asked, hey, we think attrition is high. Can you do some analysis on that? And we'll do it, and then we present it, and then they're like, okay, cool, thanks, right? So then it's kind of just ending. And then we were like, well, we'd like to make this a collaborative effort. We'd like to, go back and forth, we want to be able to deliver you a product or a result that is meaningful to you and that you're actually going to use and you're going to own as well.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, I like to make it very collaborative in that nature.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, and we just got a question in from Paul, similar to productivity. He's had experience where teams ask about other kind of tricky to measure concepts, like how do we measure effectiveness, or how do we measure how quickly an individual or a team acquires knowledge and learns. Have you seen any good approaches around that kind of request?
Yeah, so a lot of times one of the things that we try to measure in talent acquisition and then also in learning and development is, time to productivity. Essentially, that's the measurement, because you have, things in TA that's like time to fill, time to hire, how long does it take to get a button in a seat? And then from there, how long does it take for the individual to get ramped up that they're producing, at capacity or whatnot. Mm-hmm. And so that really, the only way that I've seen it done is you survey the manager, because the manager, is the one that is able to determine, yes, Johnny, for example, is, he's performing at exactly, what he's supposed to be doing. And he's productive and things of that nature. So, just like we have things like 30-day surveys, 90-day surveys that we send out to the employee, how was your first 30 days? How was your first 90 days? I also am a firm believer that we should also be sending those out to managers as well, right? How were the first 30 days of Johnny or Susan's, time here at Acme Corporation? How were the first 90 days? Are they performing up to speed? If not, is there something that we can do from L&D that can help them, get ramped up to speed? Or is it possible that we just made a bad hire as well? That is a possibility, unfortunate, but it is a possibility, right? Mm-hmm. So for measuring things like time to productivity, I would suggest, if you don't have it, go to your L&D department and say, hey, let's start sending these surveys to hiring managers. You just hired a new person. Let's see how that's going.
Mm-hmm. How about mashing up? I mean, depending on the job role and job functions. So maybe a salesperson, salesperson is supposed to sell. So do you see examples where by people, depending on the system be used, so let's say it's a CRM, can I get in there and measure how many outbound calls a sales rep's making and conversion ratio of those calls into deals and things of that sort? And then tying it together with the survey information that you just shared, which gives me some qualitative insight. approaches to take business transaction data if I can account it to an individual so that I can look at some of the quantitative measures and bring those together. Have you seen examples like that?
So I haven't. I have not been able to work with kind of the what I would call like the call center like environment, or the that population where we can measure how many calls are being made, how many deals are being signed, things of that nature. But I can see a use case for that as well, where we're tying together, hey, this person is making this many calls, and per hour and whatnot, and this is what the average is, if they're above or below that, and then taking a look at this is how many deals that they're signing and whatnot, which in and of itself, working in an outbound or inbound call center, it actually takes a lot of skill, right? So just the other night, actually, I got a call at like 8 o'clock at night from Spectrum. They, provide my internet here, and they were trying to sell me, I think, TV service as well. And for me, I was just like, no thanks. I have Netflix, I have Hulu, like I'm fine. But the person on the other line, I do commend that person because they were very, well-spoken. They were able to, try and find reasons to try and keep me on the phone longer, right? And try to really try to seal the deal for me. And they were like offering free trials and whatnot. So it's really an art and a science that goes behind, kind of those kind of roles. So with that being said, you can see it really depends on the metrics that you're trying to I would say measure. If you want somebody who is just purely transaction based, then it's yes, how many calls can they make per hour? But if you want somebody that, if you're looking at how many deals they can close, then it's a whole nother metric, and you should look at them and be able to tell the story of each metric and ensure that the story being told is an accurate one.
Okay, Michael, I'm starting to get this vision that the people department or the human resources department has a very great opportunity to consult on behalf of the organization. So it's more than hiring and firing. I'm starting to, I picked up a little thread of influencing learning and development content. I'm picking up a thread of influencing leadership skills. What's that model? Are you seeing more and more HR departments getting out as a consultant into the business community within their enterprise?
Yeah, so I personally am a fan of like a shared services model. So people analytics is so broad, right? A lot of, at least with kind of the model that I set up, a lot of things that fall into people analytics include a lot of things like reporting, which isn't very exciting in my opinion. Sorry, no offense to people that are report writers out there. But things like report polling, some people just need reports. They just need data, right? So that falls in what I would put into people analytics shared services model as well. But for more of the, the consultative type of individuals or projects and whatnot, that's still, I kind of established like a COE almost, where you might have an individual that is dedicated to just learning and development projects. So they partner with L&D, who then partners with, their client group and, work on projects of that nature, right? Or somebody that works specifically with talent acquisition, or somebody that works specifically on D&I. So that's kind of the model that I would have set up, is just kind of that shared services, but also have individuals that kind of specialize in these areas, benefits, comp, L&D, whatever, so that they're able to really just go work with those specific departments, like the comp department, and then work on those related analytics projects that come from that.
Yeah, thank you. I just had another question queued up in my head. It was like, what about consultation from a compensation management standpoint, right? Which kind of starts to drive us back to the career development, career planning, job descriptions, comp management. I mean, how often are you guys, should an HR group on behalf of the business be sensing the pulse and the rhythms in the industries that they're competing within?
I'm sorry, you cut out. All I heard was about the industry that they're in.
How often should the HR department be sensing the market rhythms in the industries they're in and making recommendations or providing some insight from external perspective back to the leadership and management? Should it be a weekly
so I would
thing?
say, yeah, I would say that's really dependent on the organization and the culture of the organization. Some organizations really like having these weekly updates, and whatnot, and pulling data from external sources and being, having a pulse on where they stand. Others are more, less frequent. They like to have it on a monthly or quarterly basis. So I really think it depends on the organization and how competitive that organization wants to be in the market. And so there's, for things like compensation, really, they're kind of the OG, if you will, when it comes to analytics, because they work with numbers the most, right? But things like learning and development and of that nature, I would say it really kind of depends on the organization. There's not a right or wrong or one size fits all approach to that.
Okay, cool. So you got some recommendations around modern approaches? You started
Absolutely.
Actually getting into it a little bit, but let's keep going down that thread a little bit.
Yeah, so I would say for modern approaches, if you don't already have a people analytics department, start off very, very, very simple, right? Everybody has Excel on their computers. That is also the original, the OG here of tools to use. Start with things like calculating turnover, right? And then from there, go into more detail, taking a look at like, okay, what are the top 5 reasons why folks are leaving? Do we have, seasonality in our turnovers that we can better prepare for, staffing plans if we need to, things of that nature. So start with Excel. And then, as you get more sophisticated, you might decide that, oh, I want to spin up a data warehouse or a data lake, or some sort of repository. Oftentimes I use the word, data warehouse or data lake to, kind of my HR colleagues, and they get this kind of look of like, oh my gosh, that seems super fancy, right? It really is. We use, you and I use the word data warehouse, data lake because we work in the data world, right? But in the simplest terms, it really is just a repository of data, someplace where we can just keep data, keep history, so that we can go back and revisit it. So I would say, something along those lines. But then obviously, as you start getting that repository going and whatnot, you need to think about like, okay, data quality, right? So I'm a firm believer, and I preach garbage in, garbage out. If we have bad data, you're going to have bad analysis, and it's not going to be pretty, right? So as you're thinking about getting data into this repository, you're going to think about, maybe do I need an ETL tool or extract, transfer, and load tool? Some of the ones that come to mind are like Alteryx, Informatica, things of that nature. And then once you get the data in and you're pulling the reports and whatnot, you're thinking, how is there a better way to show this information? Because there's only so much real estate on a screen, right? So is there a more effective way of showing this information and tell the story behind it? And then that's where you think, okay, maybe I need a visualization tool, right? Tableau, Click, Power BI, things of that sort. And so those are some of the kind of the modern tools, I would say, and the approach that I would take to establishing like a people analytics function at your organization.
Okay, and I offered up a little bit earlier, your experience around the mashing up of business transaction data with some people data. In my past, I haven't done the people domain in quite some time, but every time I have gotten involved with it in my career, there's always been a very, very strong reluctance to expose the employee data in the enterprise data warehouse, because of security concerns and privacy concerns. What kind of tips do you have around the security and access control?
Absolutely. So I would say number one, there's really no way, unless you're going to invest in having an infrastructure team that's HR specific, there is no way to really rope off, everybody and keep it just HR exclusive. So what needs to happen is you need to identify those individuals that have what I like to call the God view of everything, because there's always going to be somebody who needs to administer the system, right? Whether it's your data warehouse in Snowflake or whether it's your tools, Alteryx or whatnot, there always needs to be somebody to administer it. So, getting buy-in and having those individuals identified, and then putting them through the necessary trainings that they need to, right? So for me, things like HIPAA training, that's kind of the standard one that we put folks through, is understanding, the data that's going into a data warehouse and the repercussions if that data were to be misused and things of that nature. And then also having a great relationship and partnership with your IT team or your data team is really kind of the foundation for ensuring that, everybody's on the same page. They understand the sensitivity of, the data that's going in, and things like that. But ultimately, I think it comes down to trust, right? Everybody talks about trust. We see it everywhere. There's books written on it and whatnot. Ultimately, I personally am of the believer that treat people like adults, you treat people like professionals, right? You have my trust until you lose it. If we are, giving you access to this type of data and you intentionally misuse it, well, then there are consequences to go with that, right? So while you can have all of these, access controls and walling off different environments and whatnot, ultimately it comes down to trust. We need to be able to trust the teams and the individuals involved in starting up a data, an HR data project, and just, have that continuous conversation and dialogue with them.
Yeah, very, very interesting. And if I wanted to mash up the business transaction data with my HR data, would you recommend bring the business transaction data to the HR environment that has a little bit more control around it, or have a controlled area within the enterprise data warehouse that only selected people can see the HR data?
I would have a walled off kind of controlled environment where you're able to just have the HR data live. So I know with, going back to modern tools, things like Snowflake, for example, right? You can spin up a separate Snowflake environment that is walled off from the rest of kind of the business transaction data. Same thing with tools like an Informatica or an Alteryx. You can spin up different environments that only certain people have access to.
All right, this one's a little off the cuff. First, let me encourage everybody on the call, please, if you have any questions swirling around in your head, put them in the chat window and we can try to stump Michael. You're aware of GDPR and California's version of CCPA, I think it is, whatnot. It's all around the privacy, respecting the individual behind the data, really, right? At the end of the day, are you starting to see that kind of need, regulatory compliance need, starting to happen to protect our employees?
So to be honest, I haven't seen any new regulations or any sort of trends around HR data specifically, or employee data, because it's, when there's always a funky employee to employer relationship, what does the employer own versus what does the employee own when it comes to that, right? In terms of data or anything of that nature. What I have seen is companies being more transparent with the type of data that they're collecting from their employees, aside from name, date of birth, salary, things like that. So when we get into the, productivity, our previous, conversation earlier about productivity, companies that install these tools to track how long somebody stays online and whatnot. And, you can easily just query, if you have like Microsoft Teams, right? I'm sure you can query in Azure a table that says this person was active from here to here, et cetera, and that's all being tracked, right? But it's really about being transparent about what are we going to do with that data. There's this documentary on Netflix that talks about, I think it's Cambridge Analytica. I'm probably butchering the name here, which is that whole thing about Facebook and the election and things of that nature. If you really think about it, what they did for the election and the data that they collected on Facebook users and whatnot, in a way, it's scary, but we can do the exact same thing or very close to the same thing here in people analytics as well. So I think what's really important is not so much like the data that you're collecting or how you're storing it or things like that. It's really about being transparent about how we're using the data and what are we using it for and why are we using it, and things like that, and being transparent with that.
Yeah, that sounds like more awareness around data ethics, right?
Right.
I recently came across I don't know how many principles it was, but the very first one was respect the individual behind the data was the first ethic.
Right.
Very cool. Well, that's awesome. I think we have one more poll, Alexis. Could we throw that up?
We sure can.
All right, folks, on a scale of 1 to 5, one being not likely at all and 5 being, oh yeah, happening right now. Given what you just heard from Michael today, how likely are you to start an HR analytics function or increase the awareness? We'll give folks.
And while folks are taking that, you probably realize, the title of today's webinar was called Analytics, the Missing Knight of the HR Roundtable. And that's something that I kind of crafted up through the years, because I really realized that HR functions we're very good at being transactional. We're very good at processing hires, terms, promotions, things of that nature, merit and whatnot. And with each of those transactions, it comes with a lot of data. And there's a lot of stories that go on that can be told from that data. A lot of the new term nowadays actually is called data journalism, because stories are meant to be, something that spans and can, be told time and time again. Journalism is more about right here in the moment, what is it telling us, right? And so I started using the phrase data journalism because it's really about what are we trying to know and learn at this point in time. But for folks that are on this webinar, and thank you so much for attending, really analytics and data should be embedded in not just HR but every single function out in an organization. There is data everywhere. Every time you press a button, every time you do something, data gets generated, and you can definitely tell a story or be a data journalist with that data.
I love that thought, and it kind of goes hand in hand with data literacy, which as you increase your literacy, hopefully one of the outcomes is you can tell a better and more compelling and accurate story. Right? So let's see here. We got some poll results. We're convinced, but now we got to sell management tied with, oh yeah, happening right now. Yeah, very cool. Very cool.
That's awesome.
Well, Michael, give me any kind of, that was a beautiful closing thought there. Any other kind of closing thoughts to leave people with before we send them on their way?
Yeah, so for me, I am a huge fan, and I always try to tackle it with small wins, right? It's a lot easier to convince senior management of starting a people analytics or investing more in a people analytics function when you can show them these small wins. So it's very easy to go and say, we have this huge idea, we're going to spin up this enterprise data warehouse, we're going to have all these cool tools, automation, predictive modeling and whatnot, when in actuality, senior management might just want to know, give me a turnover percentage, right? Give me a hiring percentage, give me something small. So, that's kind of how I like to approach, these large, CapEx projects and whatnot, is by saying, we're going to break them into phases. These are small things that we want to tackle, and these are what I can deliver very quickly. So for me, it's about, I would say it's high impact and far reach. So what things have high impact that, also kind of the audience is also really wide for that as well and can have a far reach. And so that's how, for me, I've seen success in being able to either start or continually invest in a people analytics function.
That's awesome. That's great insight. Well, I appreciate you, sir. Fascinating dialogue with you today. Michael Chen, People Analytics Manager. Thank you very much, sir. And thank you everyone that joined us today. We'll wrap up the recording and get it out to all the attendees. And everyone have a wonderful rest of your day. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye, everyone.